we're way behind schedule. The next talk in this session is by Simon Nassiri, The Architecture of Curiosity, How Spatial Layout Impacts Exploration, Emotion, and Memory. And you're here.
Right. Any mics, anything? Oh, this is I got it. Hi. Thank you all for being here. It's cold, I know, and I really appreciate your presence. So my name is Simin, and I'm going to present our research on architecture of curiosity and how it influences memory on behalf of our team, Dr. Sanit Bafna and Dr. Thackeray Brown. So can I assume that we have all been in places that feel more curious or we like to explore it more, and some that feel more flat and uninteresting? Okay, so I'm going to move forward with that. Curiosity is a key driver of exploration and learning, but evidence-based design, evidence-based and experimental research so far has only focused on the internal mechanisms. This study is going to broaden this view by examining whether and how environment impacts curiosity, affect, and memory. In early 20th century, architects like Mies van der Rohe introduced a new type of architecture, which is called open or free floor plan. And that basically changed the concept of a building from compartmentalized rooms putting together and becoming a floor plan or in a place. With that, we have space, which is a spatial layout, and the memory of space, which is spatial memory. And our hypothesis for the study is that architectural design plays a critical role, not only in how people navigate spaces, but in the way they feel, explore, and then remember them. In this study, we investigate the role of spatial layout in cognition and spatial memory by studying its effect on curiosity and emotional engagement. Oh, the font is going to change here. So anyways, Berline basically gives us a framework on how something can be curious. So basically he says that if something have characteristics of novelty, surprise, complexity, and uncertainty, that can be curious. So Kaplan calls that mystery and coherence. Basically, something becomes mysterious, and for us to make it coherent for ourselves, Lowenstein calls that the information gap between them. So basically, we have something mysterious, we have the information gap, we want the information to fill the gap, and then that becomes coherent. And recently, Sen et al. Figured that there is a strong link and connection between perceptual curiosity and exploratory behavior. And as we had our keynote speaker yesterday, Mary Helen mentioned that valence and emotions always matter. And that's the exact case also for curiosity. So in our study, the hypothesis, even more specific hypothesis, is that Bayesian open floor plans can, induce greater curiosity, and then it can help us shape better memories. So in this study, we are going to basically study the spatial layout by something we call openness, which is basically connectivity, access, and visual information. That becomes what we call this openness here. And then for studying exploratory behavior, we study that by gaze direction change, pupil diameter change, head direction change, path of exploration, and the time of exploration that people spend in each environment. And then finally, for spatial memory, we basically study how people can recall the layout. And then with that, we have three distinct environments: open, semi-open, and closed, that they vary systematically in the levels of openness. And then other than that, everything else is controlled, like area, greeneries, furniture, colors, texture, number of rooms and functions, and basically everything other than the openness. Our first environment is open. This is the 3D and the floor plan that you can see, and the open floor plan is basically gives us the most visual access and also physical access or openness. So here we have spatial polygons that are indicating the areas of each specific function where we don't have real rooms. For instance, the functions of kitchen, dining room, living room, the polygons basically show us where each of them are. And then we have the axis graphs, which basically the nodes are each function, as I mentioned, like kitchen, dining room, living room, etc. And the links are basically the connection between them. So we have the axis ratio, which is basically the link to node ratio here, that, for example, for open environment is 1.5. And the lower it goes, it basically tells us that there's lower levels of access and connectivity. And then we map them on each other to show where each node is and the connection between them. And then the isofis visual connectivity heat map, which basically shows us on each pixel, when we stand on each pixel, how many other pixels we can see. So basically the visual connectivity graph, the graph is very complex, therefore we show it on a heat map. So the red pixels here are have the highest level of connectivity or visual connectivity, and the blue shows the lower levels of connectivity. The next environment is semi-open environment that, as you can see, it's still fluid, but with lower levels of connection. Spatial polygons, axis graph with axis ratio lower than the open environment, which is 1.36. And then we mapped them, and then the isofis connectivity heat map of 55. In the previous one, the isofis connectivity is 57 median, and then here we have it at 55. And the closed environment or compartmentalized environment, as you can see, it's compartmentalized completely. And spatial polygons, axis graph with axis ratio of 1.1, and the median isofis of 53. And for the experiment, we also had this demo environment for our participants to be able to, because it was a virtual reality study, participants get to use the controllers, navigate through the virtual reality environment, and also we control habituation, basically the initial excitement or curiosity of the first environment. And also the environments are shuffled for each participant. So we had 22 healthy, young, non-architect adults between 18 to 39, and that was a written subject design, and there was no limit, no task, no time limit, nothing. And it was in Unity game engine with C# and Vive Pro I. So our data basically is like this. So we put them together, we mapped them on our floor plans, and we tracked their path. And then, but because we had revisits and because it was 120 hertz, like frequency of frames per second, it was a lot. So we turned them into this. Basically, we had some intervals between them, lower the frequency, turn them into time, and we add this hue of basically jet hue to be able to track where they started their path and where they ended. So they start with dark blue and then end at dark red. So that way we could tell where each participant is at each time. We track time, path, eye gaze, pupil diameter, and head movements. And these are the data that I'm going to go over one of them, which is participant gaze direction change. And that's how we map them basically on the isofis heat map. And with the radiant, basically, you can see that and the dark red spots are the highest gaze direction change, and the dark blue spots are the lowest gaze direction change. So that way we could tell where participants are more curious. So where their gaze direction are changing more, or their head direction is changing more, and all of those curiosity measurements. And that's the same for semi-open environment and closed environment. So our results shows that environmental configuration has a significant effect on exploratory behavior, and also exploratory behavior predicted positive valence and memory performance, suggesting an integrated relationship between engagement, affect, and learning. following, we are going to go into the subjective experiences or subjective data of our participants to basically put into the context for our behavioral and physiological data. This graph here shows the behavioral, the impact of openness and motivation to explore. So we asked our participants whether they felt any difference with, with the impact of the environment and how they felt about motivation to explore. And it was a highly significant effect of environment on motivation. And then we can see that subjective curiosity for each environment varies. And there is again, significant difference between the semi-open environment and open and closed environments. They felt more curious in semi-open environment. And also in terms of violence and feeling, semi-open environment, according to our participants, they perceived as the most interesting and emotionally positive environment. And then next it was, and then closed environment was mostly negative. And this is the word cloud that they felt about each environment. You can see that it's more positive for semi-open and then open and more negative for closed environment. And then finally, they could remember the semi-open and open environment significantly better than the closed or compartmentalized environment. There wasn't a significance between semi-open and open environment, but there was significance between each of them with closed environment that I can go into the details of why there is no difference between semi-open and open later, maybe in questions. But that's not all. So interestingly, the pattern of exploratory behavior peaks in the thresholds or connecting spaces between the spatial polygons, such as corridors or hallways, where there's higher link to node access ratio. So this is basically, as you remember, an open environment. Lower right, you can see the polygons and also the graph. So the axis graph. So the yellow spots, you can see that those are the spots with highest link to node ratio, basically with highest links. And you can kind of see that on this diagram or these graphs here, that the top spot there is the yellow spot that people showed highest level of curiosity and engagement. There's this little spot here, and then also this little spot down here that was the control part, which we wanted to make sure that our data actually works, and if we have something more engaging, people will show more basically interaction with. And closed environment, again, this is the higher link to node ratio, and then the spots, the hot spots of curiosity. But for semi-open, we can see that there is not really a hot spot, but more of paths. And that's basically the interesting character of semi-open environment, that the threshold spaces are more distributed within the environment rather than, spots. And that's actually why people felt more curious in them. And open environment has the highest level of access ratio, which basically provided more information than the other two. And that's why they could remember the environments better, even though they didn't feel as curious, because they kind of gained all the information at the very beginning. And a closed environment with lowest access ratio, it was felt more confusing and people could not remember it the best. So to the best of our knowledge, this was basically the first study of evidence-based and empirical study to bridge cognitive neuroscience, psychology, and architectural design to examine how spatial configuration influences emotional valence, exploratory behavior, curiosity, and spatial memory. So this basically brings to the foreground that space is not just a backdrop, but an active modulator of cognition and affect and our daily behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was actually fascinating. I've done a lot of work in the past on the distinction between what I call the sense of order and perceptual improvisation, which I think maps onto roughly the distinction between the the very certain environment versus the uncertain environment. The uncertain environment eliciting curiosity and perceptual, because that engages. I study the visual system. It engages your visual system to try and identify what that thing is.
Exactly.
And there's something very compelling about that.
Exactly.
We need the sense of order, gives us a sense that it's a safe space, but at the same time, we also need conditions, and I think this is particularly true with developing children. They need conditions in which there is this perceptual improvisation being engaged, but trying to figure out what this thing is.
Exactly, Tom. That's true. But and the other thing here is that the sweet spot matters. That if they are super uncertain, they will become confused, and that basically triggers fear rather than curiosity.
The same topic came up yesterday. Anybody heard this talk by Nawe yesterday, the architect who was looking at curved shapes and experiencing curved shapes? And I raised a question about Disney Hall.
Mhm.
And the Disney Hall is all cattywampus walls, but you don't know the entire layout of the environment unless you've explored it a lot. And so you go from one place to the next, and you're completely lost and confused. And that's what can both frighten you and